What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about why I don't really play MMOs or just kind of generally avoid anything that has, I would say, massive, endless grinds and a big focus on multiplayer generally, even if you want to get overly particular about the exact label of an MMO. Very recently, I took a look at Fallout 76, which has that big multiplayer aspect to it, even if it is like mostly a solo game. I then took a look recently at Elder Scrolls Online again, kind of following up on just some of the industry news there around the teams, and in so doing, it kind of naturally followed that I would talk about the times in which I had played a lot of MMOs. And I have played quite a few, definitely not as many as people, but World of Warcraft, of course, the Elder Scrolls Online, obviously. I was big into Guild Wars 2 at one point. I was a big fan of Star Wars The Old Republic as well, getting a little more niche than those. I used to be really into the Secret World Legends, but eventually, around the time my son was born actually, I kind of just realized that I had to stop playing them. And that's for a variety of reasons, a lot of very logical ones, some very more specific to me. The easy and most obviously identifiable one is time, which kind of factors into all of the other decisions. MMOs are kind of designed to keep you playing. The idea there is that they keep bringing you back, and the lower barrier to entry typically for paying for those games is one of the things they do to keep you playing, and then over time you're more likely to spend more money on it than you may have necessarily spent on a regular game even. So that's certainly part of it. And in order to facilitate that, they need to keep you playing, and there's all sorts of systems in place to do exactly that, usually various forms of grinds and the like, and that time expenditure just gets a little more difficult the older you get, at least thus far in my life. And suddenly what was totally fine when I was basically just living completely on my own, no kids or anything, just working a job and coming home, that kind of stuff. MMOs fit pretty well into my life at that point, especially when I didn't have the money to play like every game that I wanted to, or just like anything that even caught my interest a little like I do now. So I would have, again, the time and the focus to spend on these games specifically, which is when I played a lot of them. And then obviously life starts happening. Video games were in fact not my full-time job for a long time, and so between a full-time job, my son and everything, and just the nature of MMOs and that sort of endless grind, it became pretty obvious that I just had to let them go. But I would say that's really kind of only part of it, because the reasons that I felt like I had to let them go as a result of all of that is mostly because of, I think, how much I tended to get wrapped up into them. Because, as you may have noticed, as the nature of the channel would suggest, I like to finish things. I like to get everything done and move on, and MMOs don't ever kind of let you do that. They're constantly, or at least as often as they can, adding more and more stuff for you to spend excessive amounts of time on, more so than just about any single player game would. And those two things are at a bit of a conflict with each other. And again, while that was fine at one point in my life, as things have progressed and moved on, it's just simply not compatible with the way I approach things anymore, especially because I kind of just don't want to play one game that much. I want to play more of them and have those different experiences, and that's obviously easier to do with single player games when there's a more obvious finish line. But that sort of drive to kind of do everything that I could possibly do and finish things and really kind of get that complete experience has always kind of been just part of my personality at large. I'm not the kind of person who likes to sit idle, and the problem with giving somebody like me then a game that is never really done means that you're kind of just playing it all the time, and that eventually led to probably the only instance with video games where it ever kind of felt like it veered into something truly unhealthy for me, just because of kind of where I was at with it in my own headspace. And so, again, kind of around that time my son was born, not all at once, but over a period of time, it was just very obvious that it could not continue. And I think the simplest way to put it would just be that I didn't like the person that playing MMOs kind of turned me into at that point. And it felt like it was starting to have like actual impact on the rest of my life, and that's when I was like, okay, this is over. And while I had certainly played single player games in between all of those, once I kind of had that moment, that's when I started just transitioning back towards single player stuff, which is obviously much more easy on your time. You don't have to coordinate with anybody. I can pause and either literally pause or just quit the game and get up and go and not have to worry about, again, any of those time commitments or other people's time, that kind of thing. I was able to bring it back to a place that I felt okay with, which eventually led to me covering all the games on the channel and everything that I've covered, and the rest is history, and here we are, I suppose. But I will also say that these days I'm a little better overall about that kind of thing. I've talked a good bit over the various videos I've made on the subject talking about my own past and everything, and I'm certainly not going to rehash that here, but a lot of those things led from, I would say, probably like 18 to 23-ish, me being a person that was a little hyper-focused on things, just trying to avoid falling back into those situations, and it kind of put me in, I would say, a prime state to play those types of games simply too much, as I mentioned, and that is something that thankfully I would say time has allowed me to sort of ease up on a bit. I don't necessarily get as, I suppose you could say, anxious in comparison, and so now I'm able to, at least on occasion, when I want to make a video about it or something, play an MMO and just, set a small goal for myself, do that thing, usually in the form of making a video, and then put it down and walk away and never think about it again, or at least until it comes up again for the relevant moment. But at the time in my life in which I was playing all these games, that was something that I was kind of struggling with, which is why it got to a point that it was starting to sort of bleed into the rest of my life that I mentioned, which is when I put a stop to it. And while I certainly play tons of video games these days, it is quite literally my job, of course, I'm able to sort of set up goals, set up boundaries, limits, that kind of thing, and just approach it in a way that feels much more healthy and manageable to me, at least, even if it is still a lot compared to what anybody else is obviously doing. And that's something you can do with single player games, especially in, again, just a much more manageable way than a game whose entire purpose is to keep you playing for as long as possible. And as a result of all of those different factors, it should be pretty obvious then that basically anytime I see anything with a big focus on an MMO-esque gameplay loop, I tend to avoid it by default. Primarily simply because I know how I can kind of get with games like that, and I have absolutely no interest in falling into those old habits, so I try to keep that stuff very contained even when I do cover it. And yet, at the same time, I don't necessarily have a problem with any of these games. I think a lot of them have great content. They're obviously a decent way to socialize in some instances, even if that's not really what I want to do with them these days. When I play these games, I tend to try to play them by myself, but at one point I was actively involved in trying to do raids and World of Warcraft and stuff, that kind of thing, which has that social element to it that you don't really get elsewhere, which is a big draw for the genre, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think a lot of those games have potentially very good stories, like Star Wars The Old Republic, actually. I loved the Sith Inquisitor storyline, the Imperial Agent one was really good. And so, somewhat living up to their name, a lot of them are in fact massive with some incredible content at times. But I guess, again, if I were to just sum this up really easily, there's a ton of reasons that I don't want to play these games at all, and I'm just better off looking for different experiences elsewhere, which is why I focus on single-player games these days. And I also know that I can just simply get too involved with them to the point it becomes an issue, and thus I prefer to keep my time with them limited and focused on specific objectives, usually in pursuit of some video or another these days. But I think that's pretty much everything I've got to say on the subject. Hope you found that interesting, I suppose. I think they're certainly capable of being great games. I've just mostly moved on, I guess is probably a good note to leave this particular video on. But that said, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about all that down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.